In this How-To-Svelte, we're going to create a skills bar. And if we come over to W3 Schools, we can check out what they've got going here. On our Svelte REPL, we'll do a similar thing, but we'll go ahead and animate it using a writable store that Svelte provides called tweened, as well as another module that will allow us to do various easing. And we'll get more into detail on that as we get into it. Let's go ahead and start. Head on over to W3 Schools and go to their How-To section and look up Skill Bar. And we'll go ahead and copy the HTML and CSS over to our blank Svelte REPL here. And right off the bat, we'll go ahead and notice the symmetry in our HTML, which tells us immediately that we can go ahead and make these into components. So each of these skill bars will be a component. So let's copy this and we'll make a component called skill bar. And we'll need to copy over container and skills. Now I'll go ahead and import the skill bar component into app. And I'll go ahead and get rid of this CSS since we're not using it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to turn our skill bar component into a flexible component by taking some of this text content and making them dynamic values. So I'll call this one skill. Then define that up here. And I'll define this one as %. And the other thing I'm going to use to create some props are the colors here that each bar will be. So this will help us to define our background color. So instead of using this CSS, we'll replace HTML as a class and add a style attribute. And we'll call this prop color. We'll have it equal green. And then the other thing we need to define that was in the CSS before is the width property. And instead of defining 90 here, we'll just use % again. And so now the width of this div is controlled by this prop here. So if I make it 20%, then it goes down to 20. Okay, so this helps us define our props. And what we'll do with these props is we'll create a data array. So let's come over to app. And let's make a data array called skill levels. And each element of the array is going to be an object. And the keys for the object will be our props here. And so now we want our skill bar to use this array. So let's pass these props over. Now it says skill, % and color are not defined. And the way we're going to define this is because we're using an array, we're going to go ahead and eventually have 4 or 5, 6, 7, 10 skills, whatever. And we're going to want to just loop through these. So let's go ahead and create an each loop. And instead of skill, we'll go ahead and destructure this. And then when we do that, these props suddenly have definition. So these props are now extracting from this. So these over here, we could take these hard-coded values away. And so let's go ahead and add some other skills here. And we'll change up these percentage values, as well as the colors. And now I'll go ahead and copy some extra HTML and CSS to clean up this a little bit. So we've got our data rendering on the screen okay. The next thing we want to do is add an animation so that the skill bars grow over time. And the way we can do that is to use a Svelte module, which we'll import, called tweened. And what we'll do with tweened is a function, and we're going to store that function in a variable which we'll call progress. And in this function, the first parameter is where we're going to start, the starting value. So we'll just start with 0 for now. And the second parameter is an object that will help us control the duration as well as the delay or the easing of the animation. So for right now, we'll just we'll put delay. And we won't use an easing yet. We'll bring that in a little bit later. Now, the next thing we need to do is we need to use a method on the tweened function called set. Progress is pointing at tweened, so we'll take progress and use the set method. And all we need to do is put a value here that it starts at 0 and it's going to end up at this value. And this value will be the percentage that we put in here. So this bar that goes up to 90%, we want to set it from 0 and then animate it all the way up to 90%. So we want to put in here the variable percent. Now, the other thing we need to do is we need to change this div's style width property from percent, and the width now needs to take a look at what progress is doing. And so we'll use the reactive $sign with progress. And you could see it immediately reacted to that. The tweened function got called starting from 0. The set method then was called and it said, well, ended at this value here that's indicated inside the percent property in our data array. So now that we have that working, in fact, let's go ahead and just try it one more time to see. So it delays for 1 second, and then it takes 800 milliseconds to do this kind of linear animation. Now, we can do something better than linear, and that's where we're going to import an easing function from Svelte easing. Now, there's lots of different types of easing curves that we can use. And if you come over to svelte.dev, you can find their Svelte easing, and these are all the in and outs as well as the in and out. So this is how the animation starts, this is how it finishes, and this is a combination of starting and finishing. So we're going to go ahead and just try this first one, back in and out. So all we have to do is indicate that we want it there. We want to import that, and then in our progress, we'll do an easing property and indicate to use back in and out. So you can see there was a little bit different behavior. I'm going to slow the duration down so we can see it a little bit easier. And on the delay, I think what I'm also going to do is abstract this out to delay time. And I'm going to export this. I'm going to export this up to app. And I'm going to add that here. So the delay time for the very first skill will be 0. But I want to stagger these, so I'll go ahead and make this one 500. Now these bars can't see that yet because we passed it as a prop, and now we need to get each of the skill bar components to see that. So we'll pass this as a prop as well. So with this easing function, we can use any of these that are available. You just copy and paste them in and try them out and see what they do. Let's try bounce in out. Let's try this one, expo in and out. So you can experiment with those and see which ones you like. We could even import 5 different easing functions here and then abstract that out as well. We could call this, give it a variable here and then include that inside the data array and then indicate which of these we want to use for which skill. I'm just going to go back in and out. Let me go ahead and tweak some of the HTML and CSS here. So instead of putting skill on top of the div container, I'll go ahead and put it inside as a span and then tweak the CSS accordingly. Now everything's crammed up against the left side there, so instead of starting the tweened at a 0, let's go ahead and maybe start it at 30. And I'll go ahead and add maybe a h1 tag here. And that's how you can make a skills bar module using Svelte.